Everyone assumed Season 2 would give us more of the same. More dusty roads, more jousting tournaments, more of Egg and Dunk bickering like an old married couple while stumbling from one disaster to the next. And honestly, nobody would have complained. Season 1 was charming in a way that the broader Game of Thrones universe had almost forgotten how to be. But here's what nobody saw coming. The people making the show have decided that charm is not enough. They're going somewhere darker, somewhere more painful, somewhere most fans of this world never expected a story about a wandering hedge knight to go. And when you hear what's actually coming in Season 2, you're going to understand why this might be the most important creative decision this series ever makes. Let's go back to where it all started. When A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms premiered, it landed differently than anything else in the Game of Thrones universe had in years. House of the Dragon had been grand and operatic and drenched in blood and political betrayal. Exactly what you expect when you return to Westeros through a story about dragon lords and dynastic collapse. But Knight of the Seven Kingdoms did something quietly radical. It slowed down. It shrank the frame. Instead of kings and queens and fire-breathing symbols of power, it gave us Ser Duncan the Tall, Dunk, a giant of a man with very little money, questionable fighting technique, and absolutely zero ability to navigate social situations. And beside him, a boy who would one day become king, playing the role of his squire and calling himself Egg. The tone of Season 1 was something close to a fable. It had the texture of a road movie, two mismatched companions moving through a world of danger and injustice, finding trouble whether they looked for it or not. There was heart in it. There was lightness. There were moments of genuine comedy and warmth that felt almost startling against the backdrop of a world most viewers associate with beheadings and betrayal. That lightness was not an accident. George R.R. Martin's original novellas, the Dunk and Egg stories, were always written with that quality. They were his way of exploring Westeros from the ground level, through the eyes of someone who has no power, no lineage, no dragons. Just a sword, a code of honor he takes more seriously than most knights ever do, and a sincere, sometimes frustrating belief that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. Season 1 adapted the Hedge Knight and did it beautifully. But Season 2 is adapting the Sworn Sword. And if you know that story, if you've read it, you already know the show is about a change in ways that are going to hit harder than anyone walking in from Season 1 might expect. Here is the shift. Here is what's coming. The Sworn Sword introduces a character named Lady Roanne Weber. She is a noblewoman. She is sharp, politically calculating, emotionally complex, and this is the part that matters, she and Ser Duncan have a connection. A real one. Not the kind of connection Dunk knows how to handle, because Dunk does not know how to handle any of this. The man can walk into a trial by combat against a knight twice his skill level and find something like calm inside himself. He can face down lords who could have him executed with a word, but put him in a room with a woman who sees through him, who matches him in ways he can't quite articulate, who makes him feel something he has no language for, and the giant completely loses his footing. That dynamic is the emotional engine of the Sworn Sword, and it is the thing that is going to define Season 2 in ways Season 1 never prepared you for, because this is not a love story in the conventional sense. It's not clean. It's not romantic in the soft focus, happily ever after way. It's a love story in the George R.R. Martin sense, which means it is aching and complicated and colored from the very beginning by the knowledge that these two people exist in a world that does not bend itself toward happy endings. Dunk is a hedge knight with no castle, no name worth speaking in polite company, no future that looks anything like the kind of life Roanne Weber inhabits. And Roanne herself is a woman navigating the brutally constrained world of Westerosi noble politics, where a widow's options narrow with every passing season, where power is held by men who see her primarily as a piece in a game she is not supposed to be playing. The tragedy is structural. It's built into the circumstances before a single feeling is exchanged, and that is what makes it devastating. For Dunk specifically, this represents a kind of challenge the first season never tested him with. The entire arc of his character in Season 1 was about justice, about whether a man with no power can still demand that the world behave honorably, whether honor is a luxury or a necessity. Those are questions Dunk is equipped to wrestle with. He's thought about them. He's built his identity around them. But Season 2 is going to ask him something different. It's going to ask him what he wants. Not what he believes, not what he owes, not what his code demands. What he, Duncan the Tall, the man underneath the armor, actually wants for himself. And that question, for someone who has spent his entire life in service to an idea of selfless duty, might be harder to answer than anything a tournament could throw at him. There's a particular kind of vulnerability in watching someone who is physically imposing struggle with emotional smallness. Dunk is enormous. He fills a doorway. He can lift things other men cannot lift and endure things other men cannot endure. But put him across from a woman who challenges him intellectually and emotionally, and that physical enormity starts to feel like a very elaborate disguise. Suddenly you see the boy underneath, the boy with no family name, no model for what love is supposed to look like, no template for how to be seen by someone and not flinch away from it. That's the version of Dunk that Season 2 is going to make you fall in love with. Not because he's noble, not because he's brave, but because he's trying, in the most fumbling, awkward, genuine way possible, to be a person rather than just a function on the production side. Season 2 is bringing in new cast members whose presence signals that the creative team is serious about elevating everything. The role of Roanne Weber is central enough that whoever takes it on will need to carry weight equal to the lead. She is not a supporting character, not a love interest in the decorative sense. She's an antagonist and an ally and a mirror and a wound, sometimes all in the same scene. The production has also been given the space and the resources to expand the visual scope of the story. The Sworn Sword takes place during a drought, a literal, land-cracking drought that has set neighbor against neighbor over water rights. And the environmental storytelling that creates the dusty desperation of it should give the series a look and feel that sits somewhere between the intimate warmth of Season 1 and the epic grandeur of House of the Dragon. Which raises an interesting question about where a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms sits in the broader landscape of Game of Thrones content. House of the Dragon went big. Deliberately, unapologetically big. Dragons the size of buildings, battles that rearrange geography, political machinations that span generations. It is prestige television operating at maximum scale. What the Dunk and Egg stories have always offered, and what Season 1 delivered on, is something different, the ground-level view. The texture of a world that all those grand dynastic stories exist on top of. But Season 2 is suggesting that ground-level and emotionally epic are not mutually exclusive. That you can tell a story about two people in a contested stream and make it feel as consequential as a war, because it is. To the people living it, it is everything. That's a tonal evolution. And tonal evolutions always carry risk. There will be viewers who came to this show specifically for the warmth of Season 1, for Dunk and Egg's banter, for the lighter touch, for the sense that this corner of Westeros was somehow safer and more hopeful than the corners they'd visited before. Season 2 is not going to be that. It's not going to be bleak in the House of the Dragon sense, but it is going to ask more of you emotionally. It's going to put Dunk in pain of a different kind and not necessarily resolve it cleanly. And in a franchise that has disappointed some viewers by subverting expectations in ways that felt careless, the question of whether this tonal shift has been handled with care is a legitimate one. But here's the argument for why it works. Here's why this might actually be the upgrade the series needed. Dunk's arc, across all of Martin's novellas, is ultimately a tragedy. Not in the moment. In the moment, he survives, he perseveres, he does the right thing, and lives to walk away. But in the long view. Anyone who knows Westerosi history knows where Dunk ends up, knowing that there's something unbearably moving about watching him try to build a life. Try to find meaning. Try to love, even badly, even unsuccessfully, even in a way that leaves marks. Season 2 is the first step in making you feel the weight of that arc. Not just admire Dunk, but grieve for him a little. Hold him a little more carefully in your chest as you watch. That's what great television does. It doesn't just entertain you. It makes the characters matter to you in ways you don't fully realize until something is taken away. And if you know the Sworn Sword, you know something is going to be taken away. For longtime fans of the novellas, Season 2 is going to feel like the show finally reaching its full potential. For viewers who discovered Dunk and Egg through the screen, it's going to feel like a deepening, like the show trusted you enough to go somewhere harder, somewhere more honest. Either way, if it's executed with the care the material deserves, it has the potential to be not just the best chapter of this series, but one of the most quietly devastating things the entire Game of Thrones universe has produced. But that's a big if. And the question that hangs over all of it is the one that anyone paying attention has to ask. Is this the upgrade a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms needed to become something truly lasting? Or is it a risk that changes the fundamental thing that made people fall in love with it in the first place? What do you think? Drop in the comments, because this conversation is just getting started.